You've probably been Googling symptoms, reading list after list of traits that all seem to fit, and maybe you've started to wonder, am I autistic? Is this finally the explanation I've been looking for? If that's where you're at right now, then this video is for you. But here's the twist. What if those signs you've been identifying with don't actually mean what you think? Not because you are wrong or that your experiences aren't valid, but because the framework you've been handed, the one that says your traits are symptoms and that your wiring is somehow broken, was never built to uncover what's really going on. It wasn't designed to empower you, it was designed to explain you away. So let's step into my office to explore this further. For a lot of women, discovering the autism label starts with reading about traits that don't quite match the stereotypes. You're not rocking back and forth or lining things up in neat little rows, but you are emotionally sensitive, easily overstimulated, and often overwhelmed in social settings. You've probably read about masking, how so many women are taught to imitate normal behaviour just to fit in, only to end up exhausted or shut down afterward. You might recognise yourself in descriptions of sensory sensitivity, strong routines, or a deep internal world that feels hard to share with others. And if you've ever been told you're too intense, too quiet, too blunt, or just too much, you've likely wondered if autism could explain it all. On paper, the traits seem to line up, but here's the part that rarely gets talked about. The label of autism is just a lens. It's one interpretation of a pattern. It describes what people see, but not why those traits exist. And if you've never had the chance to question where these traits really come from, this video might change the way you see yourself, because when we look beneath the label, we don't find a disorder. We find intelligent adaptations that were never given a voice. So let's walk through 7 signs that often lead women to wonder if they're autistic and explore what these traits might actually mean when viewed through a lens that doesn't pathologize your difference. This isn't about denying your experience. It's about uncovering a deeper truth you may never have been shown, a truth that reframes your sensitivity, your intensity, and your way of being as intelligent adaptations, not disorders. Sign 1. You feel everything, deeply. Maybe it's a friend's offhand comment, a stranger's energy in the room, or the emotional tone of a text message. Whatever it is, it hits you harder than it seems to hit everyone else. You've likely been told you're too sensitive more times than you can count. You don't just notice things, you absorb them. Someone else's mood can shift your entire day. You cry at commercials, feel other people's pain like it's your own, and often need more time alone just to recover from emotional overload. Sensitivity like this is often listed as a trait of autism, especially in women. But just because it's listed in a diagnostic manual doesn't mean it's the result of some disorder in your brain. What if this kind of sensitivity isn't a flaw, but a deeply intelligent adaptation? What if your nervous system became highly attuned as a way to emotionally survive in environments that didn't feel safe or emotionally consistent? That would mean your sensitivity isn't something wrong with you. It's something your system learned to do brilliantly. We'll come back to that. But first, let's look at another sign that's just as common and just as misunderstood. Sign 2. You overthink every interaction. Before a conversation, during it, and long after it ends, you're analysing what was said, how it was said, and what it might have meant. You find yourself scanning faces, decoding tone, and replaying every word to make sure you didn't mess something up. On the outside, you might seem quiet, awkward, overly formal, or even completely fine. But inside, social interaction often feels overwhelming, unpredictable, or just plain exhausting. This kind of experience is often labelled as a social deficit in the medical model, but what if there's no deficit at all? What if your emotional system learned early on that people were inconsistent, emotionally unsafe, or even dangerous, and it adapted by staying hyper-aware, guarded, and careful? In other words, you weren't excluded from the social classroom because you were broken. You couldn't attend the classes because your system was protecting you from an environment that felt threatening. And that protective response may still be running in the background even now. Let's move on to sign 3, because what people often call rigid may actually be something a lot more intelligent. Sign 3, you rely heavily on routines and structure. You like to plan ahead. You have your own way of doing things, and when plans suddenly change or someone disrupts your flow, it can feel like the floor drops out from under you. People might call it rigid or controlling, but to you, it just feels necessary. Structure brings calm. Familiar routines bring a sense of stability. And when life has felt unpredictable, emotionally or otherwise, repeating the same patterns becomes a way to stay grounded. This kind of need for structure is often labelled as a trait of autism, but labels don't explain what's really going on underneath. For many, this deep attachment to routine isn't about inflexibility, it's about safety. It's about emotional regulation. When the world has felt uncertain or unsafe, your nervous system starts to cling to what's known, repeatable, and controllable. It's not a disorder, it's intelligence. And that insight alone can change how you see yourself. Let's keep going, because the next sign is one that hides in plain sight, but often gets misread completely. So let me know in the comments below. Have you ever been called rigid or too controlling when really you were just trying to feel safe? Remember, you're not alone, and I read every comment personally, and I will always give you a reply. Sign 4. You shut down emotionally under pressure. You might appear calm on the outside, but inside you're frozen. Someone says something sharp, a group conversation gets too loud, you're put on the spot unexpectedly, and instead of reacting, you go blank. You don't know what you're feeling, you can't find the words, you just need to get away. This kind of emotional shutdown is often described as autistic overwhelm. But what if it's not a trait at all? What if it's your nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, shut down to survive? If you've gone through enough experiences where expressing emotion led to rejection, humiliation, or conflict, your system learns feeling is dangerous, so it disconnects, numbs out, withdraws, not because you're broken, but because your system was too wise to keep getting hurt. And once that response is wired in, it can get triggered by even small things, things that echo past emotional danger. That's why your reactions might feel too big or out of sync with the present moment. But you're not overreacting. You're responding to something your system hasn't had a chance to heal. And once you understand that, the shame starts to fall away. Let's move on to the next sign, because this next one often gets praised on the outside while hiding real pain on the inside. Sign 5. You function well, but only because you're constantly pushing yourself. You might run a business, hold a career, manage a household, or take care of others like clockwork. On the surface, you seem capable, maybe even impressive, but no one sees the toll it takes behind the scenes, the exhaustion, the emotional crashes, the way you rehearse social interactions in your head or avoid them altogether when you're running on empty. This is the kind of trait that often gets described as high-functioning autism, especially in women. But the term high functioning hides the real story. It doesn't account for the effort behind the mask, and it doesn't explain why you feel like you're always one unexpected stressor away from a complete shutdown. But what if this ability to push through, this relentless strength you've relied on, wasn't something you were born with, but something you had to build to survive? When connection feels threatening or unpredictable, your system adapts by turning inward, relying on logic, performance, and control. That adaptation begins shaping how you think, how you relate to others, and how your brain develops. This is where neural divergence begins, not as a disorder, but as a highly intelligent shift in how you process reality. Over time, that divergence gets labelled as autism, but labels don't tell the full story, because what looks like high-functioning behaviour may actually be emotional bypassing in disguise. And underneath it, there's often a deep exhaustion, because keeping up the performance takes everything you've got. Sign 6. You freeze when you need to respond quickly. Someone asks a question, the pressure's on, and suddenly your mind goes blank. It's not that you don't have anything to say, it's that you can't access it. You might need more time, more emotional safety, or simply more space to let your thoughts organise into words. But when the moment demands a quick response, especially in social settings, you freeze. Later you replay the moment endlessly, thinking of everything you could have said. This kind of delayed response is often labelled as a processing issue in autism. But what if that's not what's happening at all? What if your brain isn't slow, but your nervous system is stuck in survival mode? If social interaction has been a lifelong trigger because of rejection, shame, or emotional unpredictability, then your system may treat every social cue as a potential threat. When that happens, your brain doesn't prioritize social flow, it prioritizes safety. That freeze you feel isn't a flaw, it's not a deficit. It's your system trying to protect you in the exact moments you wish it wouldn't. Let's move to the final sign because it brings everything we've talked about into focus. Sign 7. You've started to believe you're broken, but something inside you still isn't buying it. You've been told you're too sensitive, too much, too intense, too emotional, too quiet, too different. And after years of trying to figure out what's wrong with you, you may have started to believe it. You may have even felt some relief when you found the autism label. Like maybe now you had an explanation for all of it. But even then, something didn't sit right. Maybe you couldn't explain it. Maybe it didn't feel safe to question it. But somewhere deep inside, under all the years of masking, pushing through and doubting yourself, there's a part of you that knows, I'm not broken. I've just been misunderstood. It might be buried. It might be faintly flickering. But it's there, and it's the reason you're still searching. Because what you're feeling isn't dysfunction, it's emotional residue. It's the aftershock of a life lived outside the emotional safety that every human needs to thrive. And when a system adapts to survive that kind of environment, it doesn't become defective, it becomes divergent. What the world calls autism is really this divergence, born from emotional survival, not disorder. And now, for the first time, you're standing at the edge of something powerful, a truth that's been waiting for you to remember it. The flame hasn't gone out, and once you start feeding it, everything can change. So if any of these 7 signs hit home, then drop a comment below and tell me which one stood out the most for you. Your story might be just what somebody else needs to hear. So if these signs resonated with you and you've been wondering whether you might be autistic, there's something important you deserve to know. The label you're questioning wasn't built to empower you, it was built to explain away your experience through a narrow clinical lens. A lens that says your difference is a disorder, that your struggles are permanent, that the way you think, feel and process the world is broken. But what if none of that is true? What if what's been labelled as autism is actually something else entirely, a deep form of neural divergence shaped by emotional experiences you were never given the tools to process? You don't have to adopt a label that pathologizes your intelligence, your sensitivity, or your way of being. You don't have to settle for a story that was written without your input. And if there's a part of you, a glowing ember deep inside, that's never quite accepted the idea that you're broken, that ember is the truth. It may have been dimmed by years of misunderstanding, but it's still there, quietly smouldering. And it's the reason you're here, because you're not looking for a diagnosis. You're looking for a way forward, one that makes sense, one that empowers you, and one that finally reflects what you've always known underneath it all. You were never disordered, you were diverted, and that divergence isn't your limitation, it's your signal that something powerful has been waiting underneath it all. Once the weight of old emotional patterns begins to lift, what's left isn't less than, it's something much, much more. Yours is a mind designed to see what others miss, an extraordinary system built for depth, truth and brilliance. The world may not understand this version of you yet, but you are beginning to. And now it's time to step forward and start reclaiming your narrative. If you're ready to explore this deeper, there's a free resource linked in the pinned comment below. It'll help you join the dots and begin breaking free from everything that's been holding you back. And if you want a full breakdown of everything we've covered in this video in a format you can sit with, reread and reflect on, then I've written a companion blog post to this video that goes even deeper. You can find the link to that in the pinned comment as well. And if you're wondering about how emotional triggers shape these challenges in the first place, then you need to check out this video up here. Just tap on that thumbnail and find out what nobody else is talking about.